This reading of A Voyage to Arcturus by David Lindsay was recorded in 2009 by Rafi Metz in Denver, Colorado. This reading is dedicated to Eric Gardner. A Voyage to Arcturus by David Lindsay, published by Methuen and Company, London, England, 1920.
Chapter 1. The Seance. On a March afternoon, at 8 o'clock, Backhouse, the medium, a fast-rising star in the psychic world, was ushered into the study at Prolands, the Hampstead residence of Montague Fall. The room was illuminated only by the light of a blazing fire. The host, eyeing him with indolent curiosity, got up, and the usual conventional greetings were exchanged. Having indicated an easy chair before the fire to his guest, the South American merchant sank back again into his own. The electric light was switched on. Fall's prominent, clear-cut features, metallic-looking skin, and general air of bored impassiveness did not seem greatly to impress the medium, who was accustomed to regard men from a special angle. Backhouse, on the contrary, was a novelty to the merchant. As he tranquilly studied him through half-closed lids and the smoke of a cigar, he wondered how this little, thick-set person with the pointed beard contrived to remain so fresh and sane in appearance in view of the morbid nature of his occupation. Mrs. Trent held up a slender palm. "Did you or did you not give me carte blanche, Montague?" "Of course I did," said Fall, laughing. "But what's the matter?" "Perhaps I have been rather presumptuous." "I don't know. I have invited a couple of friends to join us." No one knows them. The two most extraordinary individuals you ever saw, and mediums, I am sure." "It sounds very mysterious. Who are these conspirators?" "At least tell us their names, you provoking girl," put in Mrs. Jameson. "One rejoices in the name of Mascoul, and the other in that of Nightspore. That's nearly all that I know about them, so don't overwhelm me with any more questions." "But where did you pick them up? You must have picked them up somewhere." "But this is a cross-examination. Have I sinned against convention? I swear I will tell you not another word about them. They will be here directly, and then I will deliver them to your tender mercy." He resumed his seat, half turning his back to the assembly, and paused for a moment before beginning his task. It was precisely at this moment that the manservant opened the door and announced in a subdued but a distinct voice, "Mr. Mascoul, Mr. Nightspore." Everyone turned around. Fall arose to welcome the late arrivals. Backhouse also stood up and stared hard at them. The two strangers remained standing at the door, which was closed quietly behind them. They seemed to be waiting for the mild sensation caused by their appearance to subside before advancing into the room. Mascoul was a kind of a giant, but of broader and more robust physique than most giants. He wore a full beard. His features were thick and heavy, coarsely modeled, like those of a wooden carving, but his eyes, small and black, sparkled with the fires of intelligence and audacity. His hair was short, black, and bristling. Nightspore was of middle height, but so tough-looking that he appeared to be trained out of all human frailties and susceptibilities. His hairless face seemed consumed by an intense spiritual hunger, and his eyes were wild and distant. Both men were dressed in tweeds. Before any words were spoken, a loud and terrible crash of falling masonry caused the assembled party to start up from their chairs in consternation. It sounded as if the entire upper part of the building had collapsed. Fall sprang to the door and called to the servant to say what was happening. The man had to be questioned twice before he gathered what was required of him. He said he had heard nothing. In obedience to his master's order, he went upstairs. Nothing, however, was amiss there. Neither had the maids heard anything. Backhouse now entered on his task. It was one that began to be familiar to him, and he had no anxiety about the result. It was not possible to effect the materialization by mere concentration of will, or the exercise of any faculty. Otherwise, many people could have done what he had engaged himself to do. His nature was phenomenal. The dividing wall between himself and the spiritual world was broken in many places. Through the gaps in his mind, the inhabitants of the invisible, when he summoned them, passed for a moment timidly and awfully into the solid, colored universe. He could not say how it was brought about. The experience was a rough one for the body, and many such struggles would lead to insanity and early death. This is why Backhouse was stern and abrupt in his manner. After a long 10 minutes, the pedestal of the statue was seen to become slightly blurred, as though an intervening mist were arising from the ground. This slowly developed into a visible cloud coming hither and thither, and constantly changing shape. The professor half rose, and held his glasses with one hand further toward the bridge of his nose. By slow stages, the cloud acquired the dimensions and approximate outline of an adult human body, although all was still vague and blurred. It hovered lightly in the air, a foot or so above the couch. Backhouse looked haggard and ghastly. Mrs. Jameson quietly fainted in her chair, but she was unnoticed and presently revived. The figure was by this time unmistakably that of a man lying down. The face focused itself into distinctness. The body was draped in a sort of shroud, but the features were those of a young man. One smooth hand fell over, nearly touching the floor, white and motionless. The weaker spirits of the company stared at the vision in sick horror. The rest were grave and perplexed. The seeming man was dead, but somehow it did not appear like a death succeeding life, but like a death preliminary to life. All felt that he might sit up at any minute. The phantom body now stood upright, looking about him, still with his peculiar smile. Pryor suddenly felt sick and went out. The other men more or less hung together for the sake of human society, but Nightspore paced up and down like a man weary and impatient, while Maskell attempted to interrogate the youth. The apparition watched him with a baffling expression, but did not answer. Backhouse was sitting apart, his face buried in his hands. It was at this moment that the door was burst open violently, and a stranger, unannounced, half leaped, half strode a few yards into the room, and then stopped. None of Fall's friends had ever seen him before. He was a thick, shortish man, with surprising muscular development and a head far too large in proportion to his body. His beardless yellow face indicated, as a first impression, a mixture of sagacity, brutality, and humor. "Hi, gentlemen," he cried out loudly. His voice was piercing and oddly disagreeable to the ear. "So we have a little visitor here." Nightspore turned his back, but everyone else stared at the intruder in astonishment. He took another few steps forward, which brought him to the edge of the theater. "May I ask now, sir, how I come to have the honor of being your host?" asked Fall sullenly. He thought that the evening was not proceeding as smoothly as he had anticipated. "What's the matter, spirit usher?" "I don't know who you are, but if you use physical violence toward that, as you seem inclined to do, the consequences may prove very unpleasant. And without pleasure our evening would be spoiled, wouldn't it, my little mercenary friend?" Humor vanished from his face like sunlight from a landscape, leaving it hard and rocky. Before anyone realized what he was doing, he encircled the soft white neck of the materialized shape with his hairy hands, and, with a double turn, twisted it completely round. A faint, unearthly shriek sounded, and the body fell in a heap to the floor. Its face was uppermost. The guests were unutterably shocked to observe that its expression had changed from the mysterious but fascinating smile to a vulgar, sordid, bestial grin, which cast a cold shadow of moral nastiness into every heart. The transformation was accompanied by the sickening stench of the graveyard. The stranger poked his face up into Mascoul's. "Well, giant, what do you think of it all? Wouldn't you like to see the land where this sort of fruit grows wild?" "What sort of fruit?" "That specimen goblin." Mascoul waved him away with his huge hand. "Who are you, and how did you come here?" "Call up your friend. Perhaps he may recognize me." Nightspore had moved a chair to the fire and was watching the embers with a set, fanatical expression. "Let Cragg come to me if he wants to," he said in his strange voice. "You see, he does know me," uttered Cragg with a humorous look. Walking over to Nightspore, he put a hand on the back of his chair. "Still the same old gnawing hunger?" "What is doing these days?" demanded Nightscore disdainfully, without altering his attitude. "Sortur has gone, and we are to follow him." "How do you two come to know each other, and of whom are you speaking?" asked Mascoul, looking from one to the other in perplexity. "Cragg has something for us. Let us go outside," replied Nightspore. He got up and glanced over his shoulder. Mascoul, following the direction of his eye, observed that the few remaining men were watching their little group attentively. Chapter 2. In the Street. The three men gathered in the street outside the house. The night was slightly frosty, but particularly clear with an east wind blowing. The multitude of blazing stars caused the sky to appear like a vast scroll of hieroglyphic symbols. Maskell felt oddly excited. He had a sense that something extraordinary was about to happen. "What brought you to this house tonight, Cragg, and what made you do what you did? How are we to understand that apparition?" "That must have been Kristallman's expression on its face," muttered Nightspore. "We have discussed that, haven't we, Maskell? Maskell is anxious to behold that rare fruit in its native wilds." Maskell looked at Cragg carefully, trying to analyze his own feelings toward him. He was distinctly repelled by the man's personality, yet side by side with his aversion, a savage living energy seemed to spring up in his heart that in some strange fashion was attributable to Cragg. "Why do you insist on this simile?" he asked. "Because it is apropos. Nightspore's quite right. That was Kristallman's face, and we are going to Kristallman's country." "And where is this mysterious country?" "Tormance." "That's a quaint name, but where is it?" Cragg grinned, showing his yellow teeth in the light of the street lamp. "It is in the residential suburb of Arcturus." "What is he talking about, Nightspore? Do you mean the star of that name?" he went on to Cragg. "Which you have in front of you at this very minute," said Cragg, pointing a thick finger toward the brightest star in the southeastern sky. "There you see Arcturus, and Tormance is its one inhabited planet." Maskell looked at the heavy gleaming star, and again at Cragg. Then he pulled out a pipe and began to fill it. "You must have cultivated a new form of humor, Cragg." "I'm glad if I can amuse you, Maskell, if only for a few days." "I meant to ask you, how do you know my name?" "It would be odd if I didn't, seeing that I only came here on your account. As a matter of fact, Nightspore and I are old friends." Maskell paused with his suspended match. "You came here on my account?" "Surely. On your account and Nightspore's. We three are to be fellow travelers." Maskell now lit his pipe and puffed away coolly for a few moments. "I'm sorry, Cragg, but I must assume that you are mad." Cragg threw his head back and gave a scraping laugh. "Am I mad, Nightspore? Has Surtur gone to Tormance?" ejaculated Nightspore in a strangled voice, fixing his eyes on Cragg's face. "Yes, and he requires that we follow him at once." Maskell's heart began to beat strangely. It all sounded to him like a dream conversation. "And since how long, Cragg, have I been required to do things by a total stranger? Besides, who is this individual?" "Cragg's chief," said Nightspore, turning his head away. "The riddle is too elaborate for me. I give up." "You are looking for mysteries," said Cragg. "So naturally you are finding them. Try and simplify your ideas, my friend. The affair is plain and serious. Maskell stared hard at him and smoked rapidly. "Where have you come from now?" demanded Nightspore suddenly. "From the old observatory at Starkness. Have you heard of the famous Starkness Observatory, Maskell?" "No. Where is it?" "On the northeast coast of Scotland. Curious discoveries are made there from time to time. As, for example, how to make voyages to the stars. So this Surtur turns out to be an astronomer. And you too, presumably?" Cragg grinned again. "How long will it take you to wind up your affairs? When can you be ready to start?" "You are too considerate," said Maskell, laughing outright. "I was beginning to fear that I would be hauled away at once. However, I have neither wife, land, nor profession, so there's nothing to wait for. What is the itinerary?" "You are a fortunate man, a bold, daring heart, and no encumbrances." Cragg's features suddenly became grave and rigid. "Don't be a fool and refuse the gift of luck. A gift declined is not offered a second time." "Cragg," replied Maskell simply, returning his pipe to his pocket, "I ask you to put yourself in my place. Even if I were a man sick for adventures, how could I listen seriously to such an insane proposition as this? What do I know about you, or your past record? You may be a practical joker, or you may have come out of a madhouse. I know nothing about it. If you claim to be an exceptional man and want my cooperation, you must offer me exceptional proofs." "And what proofs would you consider adequate, Maskell?" As he spoke, he gripped Maskell's arm. A sharp, chilling pain immediately passed through the latter's body. At the same moment his brain caught fire. A light burst in upon him like the rising of a sun. He asked himself for the first time if this fantastic conversation could by any chance refer to real things. "Listen, Cragg," he said slowly, while peculiar images and conceptions started to travel in rich disorder through his mind. "You talk about a certain journey. Well, if that journey were a possible one, and I were given the chance of making it, I would be willing never to come back. For 24 hours on that Arcturian planet, I would give my life. That is my attitude toward that journey. Now prove to me that you're not talking nonsense. Produce your credentials." Cragg stared at him all the time he was speaking, his face gradually resuming its jesting expression. "Oh, you will get your 24 hours, and perhaps longer, but not much longer. You're an audacious fellow, Maskell, but this trip will prove a little strenuous, even for you. And so, like the unbelievers of old, you want a sign from heaven?" Maskell frowned. "But the whole thing is ridiculous. Our brains are overexcited by what took place in there. Let us go home and sleep it off." Cragg detained him with one hand, while groping in his breast pocket with the other. He presently fished out what resembled a small folding lens. The diameter of the glass did not exceed 2 inches. "First take a peep at Arcturus through this, Maskell. It may serve as a provisional sign. It's the best I can do, unfortunately. I am not a traveling magician. Be very careful not to drop it. It's somewhat heavy." Maskell took the lens in his hand, struggled with it for a moment, and then looked at Cragg in amazement. The little object weighed at least 20 pounds, though it was not much bigger than a crown piece. "What stuff can this be, Cragg?" "Look through it, my good friend. That's what I gave it to you for." Maskell held it up with difficulty, directed it toward the gleaming Arcturus, and snatched as long and steady a glance at the star as the muscles of his arm would permit. What he saw was this. The star, which to the naked eye appeared as a single yellow point of light, now became clearly split into two bright but minute suns, the larger of which was still yellow, while its smaller companion was a beautiful blue. But this was not all. Apparently circulating around the yellow sun was a comparatively small and hardly distinguishable satellite, which seemed to shine not by its own light, but by reflected light. Maskell lowered and raised his arm repeatedly. The same spectacle revealed itself again and again, but he was able to see nothing else. Then he passed back the lens to Cragg without a word, and stood chewing his underlip. "You take a glimpse, too," scraped Cragg, proffering the glass to Nightspore. Nightspore turned his back and began to pace up and down. Cragg laughed sardonically and returned the lens to his pocket. "Well, Maskell, are you satisfied?" "Arcturus, then, is a double sun. And is that third point the planet Tormance?" "Our future home, Maskell." Maskell continued to ponder. "You inquire if I am satisfied. I don't know, Cragg. It's miraculous, and that's all I can say about it. But I am satisfied of one thing. There must be very wonderful astronomers at Starkness, and if you invite me to your observatory, I will surely come." "I do invite you. We set off from there." "And you, Nightspore?" demanded Maskell. "The journey has to be made," answered his friend in indistinct tones, "though I don't see what will come of it." Cragg shot a penetrating glance at him. "More remarkable adventures than this would need to be arranged before we could excite Nightspore." "Yet he is coming." "But not con amore. He is coming merely to bear you company." Maskell again sought the heavy, somber star gleaming in solitary light in the southeastern heavens, and as he gazed his heart swelled with grand and painful longings, for which, however, he was unable to account to his own intellect. He felt that his destiny was in some way bound up with this gigantic, far-distant sun. But still he did not dare to admit to himself Cragg's seriousness. He heard his parting remarks in deep abstraction, and only after the lapse of several minutes, when alone with Nightspore, did he realize that they referred to such mundane matters as traveling routes and times of trains. "Does Cragg travel north with us, Nightspore? I didn't catch that." No, we go on first, and he joins us at Starkness on the evening of the day after tomorrow. Maskell remained thoughtful. What am I to think of that man? For your information, replied Knightsbor wearily, I have never known him to lie.